If you're wanting to play Hearthstone at a higher level, there's a few things that you absolutely have to have. Those things, in my opinion, would be you need to have a deck tracker. You need to have a way to be able to view your replays, whether that's recording so that you can go back and watch to analyze potential mistakes, or potentially something like a deck tracker that provides a replay feature. And, in my opinion, you need Vicious Syndicate, especially their Data Reaper report. I'm Uncorrupt, and I'm going to be going over this week's Data Reaper report, number 252. Now, before we go any farther here, I just want to say that I am not affiliated with Vicious Syndicate in any way. I don't produce the report, I don't collect the data, nothing like that. I'm just a fan of what they do. The people that we can thank for this report and all their information are right down here. You can find this at the bottom of the report itself. We're going to jump right into the class frequency. Again, we want to emphasize there's a very different experience between Top Legend and the rest of the ladder. It's almost a different game. A lot of complaints about the meta. I think a lot of those are coming from Hearthstone content creators that are playing at a very high rank. That may not necessarily affect everyone, so just keep that in mind. We're approaching apocalyptic rogue numbers at Top Legend with the class reaching a 45% play rate. That's insanely high. It's something that's definitely going to be addressed with balance adjustments by Blizzard. We've been told that there's going to be a balance patch towards the end of the month by the developers themselves. It's just going to be a week or two before it actually gets there. So if you're in this Top Legend meta, which I think for Vicious Syndicate is like top 1,000, you're going to expect to see Rogue and more Rogue. If we had a nickel every time Rogue dominated the format during the winter holidays, we'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it's happened twice in 2 consecutive years. A nice little callback there to Phineas and Ferb. And I remember this from last year in the wintertime because I actually had a video. It was Miracle Rogue at this same time last year was actually pretty dominant. Demon Hunter, the only class that provides resistance to Rogue at this bracket. Almost every other class is fading. Only exception is increased interest in Control Warrior, which appears to transition away from Renathal, and some Control Paladin experimentation. So really at the top of the ladder, if you're playing in that range, you already know it's really just Miracle Rogue and Quest Demon Hunter. That's the way it is. But we're going to see if maybe these control decks can kind of break that up. Rest of the ladder exhibits quite a bit of class diversity, with only Warrior and Priest struggling for relevance. Spitter Hunter, which is proving to be the most dominant deck outside of Legend, is creeping slowly, and play rate peaks at 10%. So if you're on the rest of the ladder, you've probably noticed you're seeing a lot of different decks, and so maybe a little bit more enjoyable experience, at least for some people, to play against a lot of variety. Thief Rogue is still more popular than Miracle Rogue, and Blood Control Death Knight quite popular. Players really seem to like that deck. Jumping into the meat and potatoes, the power ranking discussion. Top Legend meta not just apocalyptic when looking at play rates. Rogue and Demon Hunter are destroying the competitive viability of the rest of the field. Miracle Rogue and Quest Demon Hunter are the only tier 1 decks. Spitter Hunter at tier 2, and then everything else kind of falls in line behind that. Demon Hunter's advantage in the matchup is shaky. They're talking about the Miracle Rogue matchup here. We've already identified a Miracle Rogue build that no longer loses to Demon Hunter, and if Miracle Rogue wants, it can have no unfavorable matchups. And I took a look at the lists, and what they've done here is actually cut Serrated Bone Spike, because Demon Hunter is not playing any kind of minions whatsoever. You cut Serrated Bone Spike because it's actually just a worthless card in that matchup. So could be a little bit farther that Miracle Rogue could be teched to be even stronger against the rest of the ladder. Certainly scary for anybody that's playing at the top of the ladder with Miracle Rogue already being so highly represented, and the one potential soft counter is looking like it could be kind of pushed out of the meta even further. Elsewhere on the ladder, things look much better. Spitter Hunter is the best performer outside of Legend, but most classes have a deck or two that can successfully climb. Just to offer for me personally, if I was in, say, like, Silver, Gold, Platinum, even Diamond, if I was looking to climb the ladder, Spitter Hunter is exactly what I would be playing. It's got short games. I think the average game length is around 5.5 to 6 minutes. If you're in a position where you're really trying to climb quickly, I feel like fast games are where you want to be. This deck definitely has that. So if you're interested, I've actually got a guide on Spitter Hunter. You can check that out on my channel. Control Paladin sample is too low for this report's database, but the deck is coming back and looking strong with a new iteration that drops Renathal. Most important thing to note about new Control Paladin is its promising initial results beat both Miracle Rogue and Quest Hunter, so we could be seeing some kind of shakeup here at the top of the ladder, making it a potential meta breaker at higher levels of play. Unlike Control Warrior, it's not completely hapless or helpless in other matchups, so it's viable everywhere on the ladder. Matchups like Ramp Druid and Thief Rogue are still tough, but they're not oppressive. So if you're a Control enjoyer, there's been a lot of talk about how Control doesn't exist in the meta. It looks like this Control Paladin is potentially something that could be what you might enjoy, so definitely want to check that out. Vicious Syndicate does also provide deck lists if you're not familiar with them. We still want to see more data on Control Paladin. It's possible that Rogue and Demon Hunter players were initially caught off guard by this new deck, so knowledge of it could make them perform better in the matchup at higher levels of play. Considering the deck's high skill ceiling, they're talking about Miracle Rogue and Quest Demon Hunter here. We can't rule this out, but so far we haven't seen them improve their performance against Control Paladin over time. So what they're really saying here is Control Paladin definitely showing some promise, and at least in the early days, the Rogues and Demon Hunters haven't been able to make adjustments to increase their win rate against Control Paladin. In addition, Control Paladin can still tweak its build to improve its performance against them, so Control Paladin showing some potential here. Rogue, we've had a chance to take a look at the consequences of cutting Serrated Bone Spike and Miracle Rogue, and the results are interesting. We can confidently say that Quest DH is not favored against this version of Miracle Rogue, since Bone Spike is such a liability in the matchup. Feature build might even have a tiny edge against Demon Hunter. Main price to pay is a worse Hunter matchup, but this seems a very good move at Top Legend, where Demon Hunters outnumber Hunters by a large margin. Basically, you could optimize Miracle Rogue to have no unfavorable matchups, unless Control Paladin or Control Warrior prove otherwise, and they have a few different decks here if you're interested in the Rogue decks. Quest Demon Hunter build figured out last week is perfect, so no movement there. This deck looks like it actually cannot be refined any further. There is a concern that Demon Hunter might not be able to continue soft countering Miracle Rogue if Bone Spike sees decline in play, but this transition has yet to pick up enough traction. So really no movement in Demon Hunter over the last week, and again, there's going to be some deck lists here if you're interested in those. Death Knight, we did get some good data on running both Iron Deep Trog and Vicious Slither Spear in Frostburn Death Knight while cutting Nerubian Vizier. It's a side grade move that doesn't significantly change the outlook of the deck, so it's up to personal experience. Might be a good time to drop Corpse Explosion in Blood Control Death Knight. It's very weak against both Demon Hunter and Rogue, and doesn't pull enough weight in other popular matchups either, such as Frost DK. If you're interested in Frost Death Knight, I've got a guide up for that as well on my channel. It's been fairly recent. Feel free to check that out. I believe my version from that video is going to be a little bit different than what you see. The latest and greatest lists are going to be right here on this Vicious Syndicate Data Reaper report. Hunter, there's been some experimentation with Face Hunter, but its small sample size already indicates a deck that's significantly worse than both Beast Hunter and Spitter Hunter. It's capable of rushing Demon Hunters more effectively, but it sacrifices too much in the Rogue matchup to get there. We don't think it'll gain any further traction, so Face Hunter kind of dead in the water. It's not going to be the best deck. Again, if it was me personally trying to climb, I would be playing Spitter Hunter if I was trying to gain ranks anywhere from, Bronze, Silver, on up through Diamond, potentially all the way to Legend. Spitter Hunter could be good. Again, that's what I would play. I'm a really big fan of the quick games, and again, I've got a guide for that deck. Shameless plugs. You gotta love them. Druid, at no point on the ladder is Ramp Druid a good deck, yet it still sees quite a lot of play. There's been much criticism directed at the design of the deck and Wildheart Guff, but if a deck performs poorly and still sees play, it means players are having fun with it. That's worth something. Aggro Druid is in a bad competitive spot, far less attractive to the player, so it's not very noticeable. So pretty much, anytime Druid is good, people complain about Guff, nerf Guff, Guff is too strong. As soon as Druid is bad, nobody thinks that Guff needs a nerf anymore. So I do think it's important to point out here, though, people still playing a deck, even when it's not a winning deck, it means that the deck is fun. And I fully understand, I play to try to get better at Hearthstone and to try to win Hearthstone games. That's kind of what I've dedicated this channel to, is standard Hearthstone, getting better, playing better, and getting a better rank. But there's a lot of people out there, they just want to play and have fun. They're willing to play a deck that maybe doesn't win as much just because they enjoy the deck. But I also feel that you're probably going to enjoy it more if you're playing that deck to the maximum potential. But, pretty important note there for me. I think we've seen the same thing in the past from Mages, where Mage has been a very popular deck, even though it was not a highly winning deck or a tier 1 deck in the meta, or whatever that's worth. Control Warrior may have cracked the code on how to hard counter Quest Demon Hunter while exhibiting a decent matchup with Miracle Rogue. Seeing a lot of Rogue and a lot of Demon Hunter, this is going to make your ears pick up. This is done by taking last week's build, dropping Renathal, and adjusting it to a 30-card build, replacing Outrider Axe with Blacksmithing Hammer. You can trade that Blacksmithing Hammer, get more durability, and then the ability just to be able to punch your opponent for 5 every single time is going to put your opponent on a clock. This version of the deck is actually going to pack in a lot more damage. We retain the strong defensive tools that make the Demon Hunter matchup strong. That's going to be all the armor gain, of course. But we can also more consistently pressure the Rogue and hit them harder in the face before they overwhelm us with their value. Astalor in combination with Shadow Step is a key component in the Rogue deck that makes it so difficult to outlast and demands more proactivity from the Warrior. So pretty much Astalor and the ability to be able to Shadow Step Astalor, eventually leading to multiple copies of the 8/8 Astalor that's going to be shooting out the 16 damage, it's kind of killed these attrition-style control decks, meaning control decks that don't have a win condition, they just go to fatigue and win. That kind of deck doesn't exist in Hearthstone anymore, and it hasn't for a while. Control decks now usually tend to run some type of win condition of their own. You know, you still control the board, you prevent your opponent from being able to kill you, you react to what they do, but then you also have your own game plan to be able to win the game besides simply fatigue. And, you know, this certainly is going to look like that it could potentially fit into that type of mold. And to me, really just a more interesting style of control deck. Removing everything your opponent does while not doing anything yourself is, you know, just a little bit boring, and it makes games unnecessarily long, at least in my opinion. Missing link that is absent from the common 30-card build is Far Watchpost. This might be the best card in the format to combat both Miracle Rogue and Quest Demon Hunter, which has helped Warrior gain precious percentages in those matchups. To make way, we cut Finley and one Goldshire Knoll. This is from their list last week. We estimate that the featured build has a 65% win rate against Quest Demon Hunter and 50% plus against Miracle Rogue, making it a niche meta breaker at around top 100 Legend, where the popularity of these two decks reaches absurd numbers. So if you read into this a little bit more, this is the deck, this Warrior deck. It has the potential to be really good at high Legend if all you're facing is Miracle Rogue and Quest Demon Hunter. But it kind of lacks some of the firepower that it needs against decks that you might see in other places on the ladder. So unless you're facing almost exclusively Miracle Rogue and Quest Demon Hunter, there's going to be a better option, and in my opinion, two better options a little bit farther down the list here. And deck list, again, available right here if you're interested. Control Paladin is emerging to become another double answer to Miracle Rogue and Quest Demon Hunter, but one that has a much more well-rounded matchup spread compared to Control Warrior, making it playable throughout the ladder. So this is one of the decks that I mentioned just moments ago. Like Warrior, Paladin has the defensive sturdiness to outlast Demon Hunter, damage, and the removal toolkit to challenge Rogue's late-game power. Equality, being drawn consistently through Night of Anointment, helps us answer Sinstone Graveyard minions without taking damage. Anachronos is also an extremely valuable reset tool if we're getting overwhelmed, setting up the potential for counter pressure. Mr. Smite, buffed by Lightforge Carryall, gives us a path to the end game before the Rogue manages to stack Astalor. So again, it's not about just surviving the early game damage against these, you know, potentially wide or tall Rogue boards, but being able to end the game before they start playing multiple Astalors turn after turn and taking lethal damage. So again, Lightforge Carryall, the hero Paladin card, not as strong as it used to be in a world where Astalor exists, because that 8 damage or 8 mana version, when it's shooting the 16 damage, it's only one at a time. That means if you have no minions on board, you're still going to take 16. You can't have half of 1 damage. A key adjustment to the popular build we highly recommend is, of course, Far Watchpost. Flight of the Bronze is an underwhelming card that is very weak against Demon Hunter and Rogue, so we believe this change could gain further percentages in these matchups. We'd still like to see how Control Paladin performs against a well-prepared Miracle Rogue or Quest Demon Hunter player, but a 55% win rate in both matchups is not out of the question. So kind of the idea here is, if this deck gets more popular and the Rogue players and the Demon Hunter players are aware of it, they might change their mulligan or change their play style to have a better matchup against Control Paladin. But Vicious Syndicate at least seeming to think that 55% against both matchups, this Paladin deck could really shape up or shake up high legend gameplay. It's something to keep an eye on, and of course, again, they do have their preferred deck list here. Frost Mage continues to be a great choice to climb to Legend, as this matchup against Spitter Hunter carries more weight every day. So if you're looking to counter those Spitter Hunters, Frost Mage is going to be the way to go. The deck collapses at higher levels as it cannot compete with strong Rogue and Demon Hunter players. So again, you're likely to come across these on the ladder wherever you're playing. The higher you go, the more likely it is you're going to see Rogue and Demon Hunter, which means the less likely that Frost Mage is going to be a good deck to climb. And just taking a quick pause from the report itself here, one of the keys to getting a better rank in Hearthstone, no matter what level you're at, whether you're at High Legend or whether, you know, maybe you're at Silver, Bronze, Gold and you're trying to move up, it's playing the right deck at the right time. If your goal is to gain ranks on the ladder, you need to be playing a deck that's going to have good matchups against what you're seeing on the ladder. Now, what makes this a skill is that different points on the ladder are different pockets. You know, they have different things that you're running into on the ladder, so knowing what you can play to counter what you're seeing is a really, really big skill when it comes to climbing and gaining ranks in Hearthstone. So that's the reason why I say that this Vicious Syndicate report is just such a great tool to have in your toolkit when you're trying to get better ranks. Hey, this is what I'm seeing. I need to know what counters that. And this is certainly one place that you can look to find those answers and help you on your climb. A big Spell Mage manages to do a bit better against an Apocalyptic field since it beats Demon Hunter, but Rogue remains a nightmare. So again, Demon Hunter, there's a few different options of decks that can beat Demon Hunter. The problem really is Miracle Rogue. There's just nothing that's going to have a favorable matchup except Demon Hunter, but again, that could be changing based on what Vicious Syndicate is seeing in the data that they've collected over the last week. Warlock is highly oppressed by Rogue and Demon Hunter. Forget trying to play this class at the highest MMR brackets. That's going to be top legend. Imp Warlock variants are decent ladder climbers, but there are still better choices out there. So unfortunately for the Warlock enjoyers, there's actually several things that have gone wrong here. Warlock, just not a good deck. There's better options, and it's definitely not going to be good against the best decks in the meta. And also, this kind of feeds back into the power creep discussion. There's been discussion in the community, oh, power creep is out of control, and all these other kind of things. And you know, I've taken the position that power creep is necessary, because if Hearthstone continues to print the same cards over and over and over again, the game is going to be very boring, and Hearthstone would have died years ago if that's the attitude that the developers have taken with the game. So they're going to have to print stronger cards, because when new cards come out, there's an expectation from all of us, the players, that these new cards are going to change the meta. There's going to be new archetypes to play. It keeps the game fun and fresh. And so if you want to see a world where power creep is not a thing, then just take a look at the Warlock class. Warlock basically did not get an expansion in March of the Lich King, just meaning that they didn't have any cards that allowed for a new Warlock deck. They didn't get any new cards that can compete in the new meta. And so now, you know, the Warlock enjoyers are stuck playing exactly the same deck multiple expansions in a row. It's got to be boring. I kind of feel sorry for the Warlock players out there, but that's what happens when you don't have power creep. Now, there's always an argument that, you know, it can go too far, too much power can be introduced in a small amount of time, but even that seems preferable to just playing the same cards month after month after month. Just a little food for thought there. Control Priest decks have a good matchup against Miracle Rogue because of the class removal kit, but they cannot match up against the rest of the field, making them unplayable. The last 24 hours has been increased interest in Savalna Priest, but it's too recent for us to comment on. So the Savalna Priest is the Infinite Priest. It's what they call an APM deck, APM actions per minute. Doesn't really apply to Hearthstone. It's more of a real-time strategy term, but all it really means is you're just playing as many cards in a turn as you possibly can. If you check out this Priest deck, this Svalna Infinite Priest deck, what you're going to find that powers the deck is you play the Svalna, then you have the 3 mana create a shadow spell or discover a shadow spell, and then you're able to play multiple copies of the Radiant Elemental that's going to reduce the cost of any spell that you play by 1. So you can get enough copies of that Radiant Elemental on the board that you're playing free spells, you're discovering free spells, and the only limit to how many cards you can play in a single turn are going to be the turn timer. And then, of course, you can create the Void Shard that can actually go face, and that's where you're going to be able to find your lethals. So, you know, it's a somewhat interesting deck. I think it's problematic. Any deck that's limited by animation speed and turn timers, to me, is not a deck that really belongs in Hearthstone. But if you're fast and you think quickly, you can give that Svalna Priest a try. It's probably going to be pretty fun and pretty interesting if you're able to play it at a decent level. Evolved Shaman is fine, but no one cares. We do wonder if the player base has collectively become tired of Evolved mechanics, or whether this specific iteration is just not interesting enough. Evolved Shaman might just be a blander version of Thief Rogue if you squint hard enough. I actually like Evolved Shaman, and to me, Evolved Shaman is like this close. It is this close to being one of the best decks in the game. It loses to Rogue, and the reason why it loses to these Miracle Rogue decks is because Rogue just has so much removal. So you think about the Shaman board, you have the smaller minions like Totems, maybe the 1/1 Piranhas, and you know, some of these other smaller things, the 3/4s that are going to be coming off of Wildpaw Cavern. But then on the Rogue side of the board, they have Rushers, Wildpaw Knoll, and the Scribbling Stenographer. They can Shadow Step those, so one minion could potentially remove 2 minions on our side of the board. They have removal in the form of Serrated Bone Spike, which is also Mana Cheat. And then for our big minions, if we do get a big evolve, say we evolve a Knoll into a big like 12/12 Deathwing, the random concoctions destroy a random enemy minion, means that the big minions are going to get wiped off the board too. So Rogue really just counters any kind of minion that Evolved Shaman can play. Evolved Shaman can still win this matchup. I think it's something like 55% in favor of the Rogue. If the Rogue has a bad draw, Evolved Shaman can definitely win that matchup. Problem is, Rogue doesn't have a bad draw very often because, again, the concoctions, they can discover draw 2 and another draw 2, potentially drawing 4 cards from the concoction. So it really limits the chances that that Rogue is going to have a bad draw. But Evolved Shaman is actually really good against Quest Demon Hunter. I think it's something like 60% in favor of the Evolved Shaman against the Demon Hunter. And there's actually a lot of stats available on this Evolved Shaman deck, so we definitely know what the best cards are in the mulligan, and we know for sure that it's good against Quest DH. So if you're looking to counter Quest DH and you don't see a lot of the Miracle Rogues, and you don't mind playing a 9 or 10 minute game, Evolved Shaman is definitely a strong deck. And the meta breaker of the week, in a bleak, narrow meta environment, Uther could come in to save the day and bring reactive strategies back into the fray. They're talking about this Paladin control deck mentioned earlier. Control Paladin showing some potential at loosening the grip of Rogue Demon Hunter at higher levels of play. Still an accessible deck to play at lower ranks of the ladder, making it superior to the Fringe Control Warrior. To ensure an advantage in the Rogue and Demon Hunter matchups, we want to see how far Watchpost performs in this deck. It'll be interesting to evaluate how these matchups develop over time. We'll be back to report on how these things have played out next week. What wins? Incredibly skill-testing, card-flinging dominant decks, or a tower? That's going to do it for Data Reaper Report number 252 review. I'm Uncorrupt. Thank you for watching.